I've got to say, it's pretty crazy how fast time flies. It's been almost 2 years since the release and controversy surrounding Star Wars Battlefront 2. Recall that this is a game that garnered a ton of backlash because of its pay-to-win loot boxes, with the way it locked heroes behind this massive grind wall that encouraged microtransactions, spending, and of course, there's the infamous sense of pride and accomplishment response that still remains, I believe, the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. And if you go to Metacritic, you can see still that Battlefront 2 remains amongst the lowest scored games when it comes to user reviews at 1.1. And even critics weren't really big fans of the game either. Now, to be fair, the game has made a lot of improvements since then. A lot of content has been added, progression has obviously been revamped, and so on and so forth. The game is in a better place now, but I'd be hard-pressed to forget what this game ultimately represents, because this is EA's intentions laid bare. And they've backpedaled a lot since then because they had to. Now, it's been a while since that whole controversy played out, and we haven't really heard EA or DICE talk about what happened all that much, but that all changes with this article published by website gamesindustry.biz, with a headline that reads, "Restoring Trust in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Design director Dennis Branval reflects on the fallout from the loot box controversy and how DICE has won back the community." I don't know if it's safe to say that they've won back the community. I think, players who have stuck with the game are enjoying what's currently there now a lot more than how the game launched, but there's still plenty of people out there who won't soon forget or forgive what Battlefront 2 did and what it represents. But there's some interesting insight here that's offered, and I'd like to comment on what Dennis had to say about this whole ordeal. So the article opens with the quote, "Not a week goes by without us thinking, imagine if we hadn't launched with loot boxes the way we did. You and me both, buddy. This could have been a really great game and could have seen a lot of great progress in terms of content update had DICE not had to focus so much on revamping progression, because progression was entirely designed around encouraging people to purchase loot boxes because it was pay to win." Now, at the same time, though, I will say that part of me is glad that this whole debacle played out, because the conversation of loot boxes wouldn't be where it is now without EA fucking up so badly. Now we're seeing government bodies getting more and more concerned about the way video game companies and the games industry as a whole is pushing for what is essentially glorified gambling. We're seeing the United States. Recently, they introduced a bill that gained bipartisan support in favor of regulating loot boxes. The FTC recently held a loot box workshop that brought in games industry pundits, and during that workshop, the ESA once again presented the same old tired arguments that were debunked by researchers and consumer advocacy organizations. The UK Parliament held their own hearing. That's where we got the infamous quote from EA about how they're not loot boxes, they're surprise mechanics. And then there is the Netherlands and Belgium, both of which enforce their gambling laws upon loot boxes, recognizing that loot boxes are in fact gambling. So more and more the world is becoming aware of what loot boxes represent, because Battlefront 2 kickstarted this movement against it. So in a way, I'm grateful that EA showed the games industry's true colors through Star Wars Battlefront 2, though regrettably that also meant that Battlefront 2, a game that could have been great, had to suffer quite tremendously. Dennis then said, "We would have been in a different place, that's for sure, because we truly believe the game is a worthy sequel to Battlefront 1 and lives up to the legacy of the Battlefront franchise. It certainly could have been all that and more, but again, monetization, compromising and marring the design integrity of a game that had so much potential. Entirely on you guys." The article then recounts how 24 hours before launch, Battlefront 2 removed the loot boxes and the monetization system completely, after which DICE began to work on a revamp, and we saw microtransactions return in a form that loot boxes were something that you couldn't pay for anymore, and all the microtransactions centered around cosmetics that you purchased directly. Now, I wish this was something that carried forth through future EA games, but we obviously know that's not the case. FIFA loot box galore, pay-to-win galore. Apex Legends recently pulled some pretty shady stuff with loot boxes. Despite EA saying that this is something they'll never do again, they've continued to push loot boxes and try to poke and prod at ways to continue including them in their games, despite encroaching regulation from government, despite continued backlash, so on and so forth. So EA, they are stubborn when it comes to making that dough. Games industry also pointed out how EA was disappointed with Star Wars Battlefront 2 sales. Way back in January 31st, 2018, it was reported that Battlefront 2 had sold over 7 million copies, which by EA standards is apparently just not good, even though 7 million copies is still a lot of units sold. But given that this is the Star Wars franchise, it certainly was expected that the game would sell gangbusters, a lot more than 7 million. Like, EA still made money from this, but they expected to make a lot more, given this is Star Wars we're talking about. But word about the game's nefarious practices spread far and wide, and that indeed had a large effect on the game's inability to meet financial guidance. Dennis then said this: "We really needed to take a step back and do some house cleaning, not completely dissimilar to Rainbow Six Siege. They didn't launch the way they wanted, but now they're doing well, and I think we are on a similar trajectory." Indeed, Rainbow Six Siege did make something of a major comeback, though it's had its ups and downs when it comes to monetization practices. And we'll see if Star Wars Battlefront 2 can make a recovery of that magnitude with the release of Rise of Skywalker, the movie, Episode 9. With that looming on the horizon, maybe Battlefront 2 will get some kind of boost. And people who have returned to Battlefront 2 are saying that the game is definitely in a much better place now. But again, there will be plenty of others who will not forget what this game represents, what it started, what it tried to do. So it'll be interesting to see if this game has a tangible means to recover. Dennis continued, "We hit rock bottom in terms of player sentiment, but now it's climbing every month." Rock bottom, I'd say, is an accurate assessment of what Battlefront 2 did to both DICE and EA. It was without question, I'd say, the biggest backlash we have seen against EA. It gained a lot of mainstream attention. Outlets like CNN picked this stuff up. It's not often that a Reddit response becomes the most downvoted in all of Reddit's history. It's still at like 230,000 downvotes, which is unprecedented by all stretches of imagination. But Dennis insisted that the game's in a much better place now. He said, "We're delivering more content this year than we did in the first year, which is also a sign of a healthy game. The community's happier than it's ever been, especially with the big announcement yesterday. I think we had to take a step back. The team had to look at itself in the mirror a little bit, pick ourselves up from a really rough Christmas for everyone, and then just get back to work. Now it's a lot of fun. It wasn't that much fun in the spring of 2018. That wasn't the best time at DICE, that's for sure." The thing that gets me about all of this is that it should have been immediately obvious when they shipped Battlefront 2 the way they did that people wouldn't be happy with it. I have to wonder what their train of thought was. Surely they play-tested this game. Surely they understood what they were actually shipping there. These aren't dumb people when they design a monetization system that fine-tuned for extracting as much cash as possible. You don't get that by accident. That's intentional. So I have to wonder what they expected, that people would just swallow this and accept it. You know, he talks about hitting rock bottom. I don't know how it is that it was only after launch that everyone realized, oh, we gotta take a step back. He talks about how there isn't a week that goes by where they aren't thinking about how things could have played out differently. And yeah, hindsight is 2020, but you know, this is just one of those things that shouldn't require hindsight. And keep in mind that things were way worse during the beta, and people expressed their sentiments during the beta that this is completely crap, you know, the whole pay-to-win system. And yet, what EA did was tweak things and try to adjust things and dial things back just a little bit. They kept pushing and pushing for the system. They fought for this pay-to-win loot box integration up until the very end when the backlash got way too severe. Only then did they finally think, okay, this isn't gonna work. That's what pisses me off about Battlefront 2, just the intentions behind it. This was no accident. This wasn't something they accidentally stumbled upon. They had every intention of shipping a pay-to-win game modeled after all those just disgusting mobile games that are out there right now, all that garbage. I don't know who ultimately was in charge of defining the monetization system, But let's not kid ourselves, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they hit rock bottom for good reason. Dennis then proceeded to talk about how with Battlefront 1, they went the season pass route, but with Battlefront 2, they wanted to go with, free updates, everyone sees the same content route, which would have ultimately been beneficial had the pay-to-win loot boxes not completely marred all of that. I still remember when EA took the stage to talk about how they learned their lessons from Battlefront 1 and how they're applying these lessons learned in Battlefront 2. So when people initially heard about how there's no season pass, but rather everyone gets the same content, everyone was super hyped. What we weren't told, however, is about the pay-to-win loot box system that ultimately yielded a worse game than Battlefront 1. Dennis then expressed his sentiments to continue developing Battlefront 2 as a live service. He said, with this one, we challenge ourselves to undertake big overhauls of systems that aren't doing as well as we hoped, because this is it. This is the game we're going to be working on. He's basically saying we're not going to abandon this game. This is going to be a long-term type of experience, a long-term project. There was then some talk about the impending release of Rise of Skywalker and how Battlefront 2 is working in conjunction with Disney, I suppose, to make sure that content release for Battlefront 2 aligns with the movie release, which is also going to align with the release of Respawn's Jedi Fallen Order, which comes out this fall. And then when asked about the possibility of a Battlefront sequel, a Battlefront 3, what Dennis basically said was that they're sticking with Battlefront 2 and just developing that one game over a long period of time, which means that we're not going to see Battlefront 3 anytime soon. He said, DICE has been on the sequel treadmill for quite a while, and I think the industry is changing rapidly. We felt that, and we know that we want to build communities rather than customers. That's been a change in our approach. We want to stick with our games a lot longer, and we want our communities to feel like they're well taken care of. It makes no sense to constantly try to stop them playing the game they like and make them play the new game they also should like just because we don't want to work on the old game anymore. It's not good for the community, and in this age, if it's not good for the community, it's probably not going to be good for business either. That's why we're sticking with it. Dennis then concluded with this sentiment. Even back when we took on the franchise, there were questions around whether we should call the first one Battlefront 3. I'm not necessarily sure that whatever the fan expectations of Battlefront 3 are, need to happen with a 3 at the end. I think you can get all the Battlefront fantasies that you want from our games. That's our mindset, trying to give you everything. Instant Action is a good example of that. It's a throwback name to the franchise when it wasn't at EA, and people love that. That's been the key to going forward. Respect the past. I'm not sure if we did a good job of that early on, but I think we do a much better job now. So with this whole rise of live services, game publishers are in a position now where they have to take less risks and make less games, kind of put out a handful of these infinitely recurrently monetizable projects, and as long as those keep milking in the cash, they really don't have to put in that much work or spend as much money in new projects and all that. Now, if handled correctly, this model is not necessarily a bad thing. People love the idea of one game that's really fleshed out, living on for a long time. The live service model can be a good thing if handled correctly. There are a couple of these constantly updated long-term games out there that have done a good job at it and that has garnered a lot of goodwill. If developers can stick to consumer-friendly practices with the way they monetize their games, if they can release consistent updates and overhauls and content that make the game feel new with each season, each iteration, what have you, then this can turn out to be something fruitful for all parties. But the fear with long-term live services is that, they'll have the game be one thing at first, it'll gain a lot of popularity, and once it reaches a high player base, they'll suddenly introduce new schemes, one after another, that kind of slowly start favoring monetization over a rewarding progression system. So that's my fear with Battlefront 2's future, that if it does become successful, it is at risk of kind of seeing this shift in which monetization suddenly becomes the main priority. We saw it happen with Apex Legends, right? With the Iron Crown event, where they locked the heirloom item, the marquee item of the Iron Crown event, the Raven's Bite, behind having to purchase 24 loot boxes. You know, it was just a step in the wrong direction, and that's a pattern we see happen time and again with EA games. Just as they're walking towards a path that seems correct, they'll kind of pivot once in a while and try to lean more towards the monetization path. And I'm not convinced that Battlefront 2 won't head there at some point, but, you know, that's just me. At least the game is in a much better place now. It's just, given EA's history, I'm always cautious about what the future holds for a long-term EA game. But yeah, the main thing though, Dennis acknowledged that Battlefront 2, it was pretty bad. He acknowledged that he always thinks about how things could have been different and how, in terms of player sentiment, yeah, they did indeed hit rock bottom. And I'm not sure this is something they'll ever be able to escape from. I think Battlefront 2 will always have that reputation of being the game that kickstarted all this push for loot box regulation, the game that put the whole loot box issue up on a pedestal and highlighted what a garbage system it is and how exploitable it is. From here on out, it's all about actions, you know? EA's words just can't be trusted anymore. They've always said one thing and then output another. This has been a consistent pattern, so it's all about what EA does as a company, what DICE does as a developer. And we'll see how Battlefront 2 pans out, but what I do know is that EA as a company, they're definitely not letting on when it comes to loot boxes. Again, with Apex Legends, with FIFA, among many others, their mobile games, they're still pushing for it. And that's why I will never trust EA, because their actions don't reflect the sentiments they've expressed in the past about how their intention is to fix their mistakes, to not repeat their mistakes, to do better next time. They have not done better. They have just tried to repeat the same mistakes in different ways, in ways that maybe are more subtle and less noticeable. But all they've done is attract the attention of government bodies, of regulators, and especially with, you know, how they said loot boxes aren't bad, you know, they're ethical, they're surprise mechanics, all that garbage. Stuff like that continues to remind me that this is still the same old publisher that we know and hate. And as long as they continue to rule over the Star Wars franchise, I'll always be concerned for the future. Anyway, I've said all there is to say about this article. I'd love to hear what your take is on what Dennis said about the whole Star Wars Battlefront 2 loot box controversy in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.